Hi, this video is to demonstrate how AgilePoint Data Entity Agile Paths is integrated with AgilePoint NX. In our previous video, we have demonstrated the Data Entity Framework feature. Now, I would like to summarize the same. AgilePoint NX Data Entity provides inbuilt entity designer just like you see in CRM systems like Salesforce and Dynamic CRM, and even Power Apps of late. This will become backbone of the application development using which data doesn't just stay in AgilePoint XML and will be stored in the database which will be used in reporting. You no longer need to deal with SQL tools to design your table. It can be done from the browser in a wizard-driven experience without needing DBA skills. So let me navigate to Build Apps. So in Activity Library, we have AgilePoint Data Entity Activities. So we have 7 activities over here, that is Copy Record, Create Record, Delete Record, Move Record, Query Multiple Record, Retrieve Record, and Update Record. So here I have created an expense report process in which I have made use of AgilePoint Data Entity Activities. To make use of these activities, I have also created few data entities. So let us navigate to Data Entity Designer page. So under Entities, these are the entities that I have created, that is Employee Information, Manager Information, Approval, and Approval Copy. Now let us view the fields of employee information. So the fields are account, department, email, employee ID, name, phone, and title. Here employee ID is my primary field. Next, let us view the fields of manager information. Here the fields are business justification, email, manager, and record ID. Here record ID is my primary field. Next, let us view the fields of approval entity. Here, the fields are approval, comments, next reviewer, and record ID. And record ID is my primary field. Let us now navigate to Build Apps. So here in my process, I have made use of Create Record activity. This activity is used to create a record in a specified entity. Let us now go to the configuration. So here I have made use of this activity to pass employee information to the entity. Here you have 2 radio buttons to list standard entities and custom entities. I will select custom entities, which will list all the custom entities in this drop down. So here I have selected employee information as my entity. Let us go through the request mapping. Here, I have mapped the process fields with the corresponding employee information fields. Once done, click on Back. And also I have used a custom attribute in order to store the record ID. Once the configuration is done, click on Finish. Similarly, I have used Create Record activity to create manager information records. After creating the records, the flow will next go to manager review, and once the manager approves, it will store the manager approval information in approval entity. For this, I have made use of Create Record activity. So once it is approved, the process next goes to director review, and once the director approves, the approval status will be updated by using Update Record activity. This activity is used to update the records corresponding to record ID. Now let us go through the configuration. Here I have selected entity name as approval. In order to update a record, I will have to pass the record ID. So I have made use of a custom attribute in order to pass that. Next, let us go to the request mapping. Here, in order to update approval, next reviewer, and comments, I have mapped it to respective process fields. Once done, click on Back. In order to store the record ID, I have made use of a custom attribute. Once the configuration is done, click on Finish. So once it is approved, in order to generate the report, I have made use of Retrieve Record and Query Multiple Record activity. Let us go through Retrieve Record activity. This activity is used to retrieve a single record from an entity. Here I have configured this activity in order to retrieve employee information. So I have selected employee information entity. Here, in order to retrieve the record, you can either use an ID or a record ID. In my case, I will be using record ID. So in order to retrieve the record, I will be passing a custom attribute. Next, let us go to the response mapping. So here I have mapped employee information fields to my process fields. Once the mapping is done, click on back, and once the configuration is done, click on finish. Similarly, in order to retrieve manager information, I have made use of one more retrieve record activity. Next, to retrieve my approval status report, I have made use of query multiple records activity. Let us go to the configuration. This activity is used to retrieve multiple records based on a criteria. Here I have selected approval as my entity. We have filter option to filter the records based on some condition. For this, click on create. This drop down will list all the entities present. So let me select approval entity. The next field will list all the operators present. Let me select equal operator. So the condition will be approval equals approve. By clicking on add row, you can add multiple conditions. In this case, I will make use of only one condition. So once the conditions are set, click on back. So here you can view the query expression with entity name and corresponding conditions. Now let us go to the response mapping. Here I have mapped few of my approval entity fields to the corresponding process fields. Once done, click on back, and once the configurations are done, click on finish. Once the report is successfully generated, it sends an approval email. Next, I have configured copy record activity. This activity is used to copy the records from one entity to another entity. Now let us go to the configuration. Here, there are two types of configuration. One is source configuration and the other is target configuration. So here in source, I have selected entity as approval. Filter by drop down is used to filter the records based on ID or record ID. If record exists drop down provides with actions to perform if the record already exists. So we have three types of actions, that is overwrite, skip and proceed, and stop and throw exception. Also, I have configured a custom attribute in order to pass the record ID. Next, let us go to the target configuration. Here I have selected target entity as approval copy, and in order to store the response, I have passed a custom attribute. Once the configurations are done, click on finish. Next, let us go to delete record activity. This activity is used to delete a record. Let us go to the configuration. So here I have selected my entity name as approval. Here I will be passing the record ID of the record which has to be deleted. Store number of records deleted. This field will store the number of records that has been deleted. Once the configurations are done, click on finish. Next, let us go to move record activity. This activity is used to move the record from one entity to another. Let us go to the configuration. Here we have two types of configuration, that is source and target configuration. I have selected my source entity name as approval copy. I have filtered by record ID, and in case record exists it will overwrite, and I have passed a custom attribute in order to pass my record ID. Next, let us go to the target configuration. So here I have selected my target entity as approval, and in order to store the record ID I have made use of a custom attribute. Once the configurations are done, click on finish, then save and publish the application. Once the application is published, let us navigate to Work Center and let us initiate the process. Here I have filled in necessary employee information details such as the name, title, phone number and email. Also, manager information and business justification has been provided. Once all the necessary details has been provided, click on Submit. Now let us check if employee information details has been added. Click on Employee Information Entity. Click on Data. You can observe that data has been inserted. Similarly, let us go to Manager Information. Click on Data. So you can observe that data has been added. Next, let us navigate to Work Center. So under My Task, you can observe that the task has been assigned for Manager Review. So this is the Manager Review form, and once the manager has reviewed, he will approve the task and then click on Submit. So next you can observe that the task is assigned for Director to review. Let us open the form. So once the Director reviews, he can approve and then submit the form. So now let us view approval entity to check if the record has been added. Go to approval entity. Click on data. So here you can see that manager and director approval record has been added. Next, let us view the process. So here you can see that retrieve entity and query multiple entity activities has been completed. Next, let us see the report view. So here you can see that the employee information, manager information and approval status has been successfully retrieved. Next, let us check if the records has been copied from approval entity to approval copy entity. Go to approval copy entity, click on data. So here you can observe that the record has been copied from approval entity to approval copy entity. Next, since I've used the delete record activity wherein I'll be deleting a record from approval entity, let me check if the record has been deleted. Let me go to approval entity. Click on data. So here you can observe that one record has been deleted. Next, I had used move record activity wherein I had configured the record to be moved from approval copy entity to approval entity. So let us first check approval copy entity. Click on data. Here you can see that the record is not present. So now let us check approval entity. Click on data. So here you can see that the record has been successfully moved into this entity, and since I had used overwrite option, you can see that the previous data has been overwritten. So this covers all the functionalities of AgilePoint data entity activities. Thank you.